Welcome to Deep Dive by Abu Yusuf. And today's topic is, it's really important, so you'll want to stick with us on this one. You might actually find the solution today to an issue that you've been facing for a long time.
You know that feeling, right? When you're kind of stuck, like you have all these things you want to do or maybe even need to do. You feel that nudge, you know,
hmm
to be more productive, more fulfilled, but you just can't seem to get going.
It's like this huge gap between what you're aiming for and where you are right now. And that can be, honestly, pretty discouraging.
Totally. And that's exactly what we're going to dive into today. How to break free from that cycle of feeling stuck and inactive and actually start moving towards a life that feels more, I don't know, more meaningful.
Yeah.
And we've been looking at some really interesting research and writings that offer insights from both modern psychology and Islamic wisdom.
Yeah, and it's super interesting how those two, like psychology and Islamic wisdom, aren't really separate things.
Right. You could even argue that a lot of the effective strategies we see coming out of modern psychology, they kind of have like echoes or maybe even their roots in these ancient wisdom traditions.
Okay, so let's get into it. That feeling of being pulled in a million directions, the struggle to stick with the things that really matter. Our research points to this thing called instant gratification as a big factor here. That need for instant rewards. It makes it so hard to commit to things that need, like, consistent effort over time.
Yeah, that's a huge insight. Our brains are wired to seek pleasure. And in today's world, we're just bombarded with these easy dopamine hits constantly, right? Social media, entertainment that's right there at your fingertips, instant validation. So you come up against a task that takes time and effort, and there's no immediate payoff. Well, it's easy to see why we might hesitate or even give up.
You know, it's like that analogy they use, the farmer versus the gambler.
Oh, yeah, I love that one.
The gambler is always chasing that next quick win, but they rarely build anything lasting.
Right. But the farmer, they put in the time and effort. They're nurturing something that grows steadily over time and provides real, substantial returns in the long run. It's all about patience and delayed gratification.
Exactly. And that kind of sets the stage for how we can start to address this whole thing. So from a psychological perspective, one key strategy is to consciously fight that pull of instant gratification.
Totally.
But how do we actually do that? I mean, our brains are so used to those instant hits of pleasure. What are some practical things someone can do?
One really effective method is to start incredibly small, like shockingly small. The research shows that tackling tasks that you know are good for you in the long run, even if they seem kind of boring at first, for just a few minutes a day can make a huge difference.
Okay, so for example.
5 minutes of reading, 10 minutes of exercise. The goal isn't to achieve some massive outcome right away. It's to build that initial momentum and prove to yourself that you can follow through.
So it's about these like small victories, these small wins.
Small wins, exactly. And another powerful technique is to intentionally set delayed rewards for yourself. So instead of getting into those immediate temptations, you train your mind to understand that putting in the focused effort now will lead to something enjoyable later.
Okay, I'm thinking of a specific example.
Yeah, like only allowing yourself to watch your favorite show after you've done 30 minutes of focused work. It's like you're rewiring your brain's reward system.
Right. So instead of getting that dopamine rush instantly, it becomes linked to completing a task. You're teaching yourself that putting in the effort leads to the pleasure.
Exactly. And we also have to be really mindful of the constant overstimulation we get from things like social media and just like endless entertainment. It's like that desensitizes us to the deeper satisfaction that comes from real-world accomplishments. So actively reducing our exposure to those things and intentionally replacing them with activities that give us a genuine sense of achievement, that's crucial for finding balance.
Now, one psychological tool that really stood out to me was the 2-minute rule. It sounds almost too simple, but it's actually pretty powerful. Can you explain how it works?
Sure. The 2-minute rule is all about overcoming that initial resistance we feel when we're faced with a big task.
And procrastination.
Yeah, procrastination too.
Hmm.
The idea is to commit to doing just any part of that task, even a tiny part, for just 2 minutes every single day.
That sounds ridiculously easy.
And that's the point. It bypasses your brain's fear response to these large, daunting tasks by making the initial commitment so small that it feels almost effortless to start. It's like you're outsmarting your own procrastination.
I get it.
Yeah.
So like if your goal is to start a business, instead of getting overwhelmed by the thought of everything involved.
Or you just commit to brainstorming or jotting down one business idea each day, which probably takes less than 2 minutes. At first, it's not about accomplishing something huge in those 2 minutes. It's about establishing the habit of showing up, of engaging with the task consistently. And once you've done that for a while, it becomes so much easier to naturally extend that time. You've already overcome the biggest hurdle, which is starting.
You're basically tricking your brain into getting started, and then the momentum often takes over. And this leads perfectly into the idea of building discipline instead of relying on motivation. Because, let's be honest, motivation is fleeting.
You're so right. Relying on motivation alone will make you inconsistent. Discipline, on the other hand, is about building routines and habits that you stick to no matter how you feel. And the concept of micro habits is really important here. It's about making that initial commitment so tiny that it's almost impossible to say no to it.
It's like that example in the material. Instead of saying, I'm going to write a book, which can feel overwhelming, you commit to writing just 100 words every day.
Yes, it might seem insignificant in the moment, but those small, consistent actions add up over time and they turn into something substantial.
So the focus is on showing up and engaging with the process, rather than fixating on the end goal, which might be far off in the future.
Exactly. And this naturally brings us to the idea of shifting from outcome-based thinking to process-based thinking.
And this is a shift that I really connected with. You know how we get so focused on that desired outcome, like I want to be successful or I want to be fluent in another language.
Yeah.
We forget about the daily actions that actually get us there.
It's so true. And this shift is about focusing on, and this is key, finding enjoyment and satisfaction in the process itself.
Okay, so how does that work in practice?
So instead of just thinking, I want to be successful, you focus on the things you need to do every day to get closer to that success, whether it's learning a new skill, networking, or just dedicating time to your craft. Think of a chef who's learning a new cuisine. An outcome-focused approach would be all about creating that perfect dish right away. But a process-focused approach would be about enjoying the learning process, understanding the ingredients, appreciating the subtle flavors, even if the first few attempts aren't perfect. When you find the joy in the process, staying consistent becomes so much easier.
I love that. Okay, so the final psychological aspect we explored was this idea of intentionally facing discomfort every day. Now, that sounds a bit counterintuitive. Why would we want to do that?
Well, the thinking is that avoiding discomfort actually makes us more afraid of it in the long run. It limits our growth. So by choosing to face small, manageable challenges on purpose, we gradually expand our comfort zone and build resilience.
So, like, what kind of challenges?
There's this thing called the discomfort challenge, where you do one slightly uncomfortable thing each day. It could be taking a cold shower, waking up a bit earlier, or even just striking up a conversation with someone you don't know.
It's like intentionally putting yourself in those situations to build mental toughness.
Exactly. You become less reactive to those uncomfortable situations and more willing to step outside your comfort zone.
I like it. Okay, so those are some really practical psychological strategies. Now let's shift our focus to the wisdom we find in Islamic teachings. The first point that was highlighted was the importance of understanding our purpose in life, and they referenced a verse from the Quran, Surah At-Dariyat, 51.56.
Right. This is a fundamental principle in Islam. The verse says, "And I did not create the jinn and mankind except to worship me." Understanding this ultimate purpose gives us a framework that can completely change our perspective. So instead of being driven by fleeting pleasures and that need for instant gratification, our actions are guided by a desire for something much greater and longer lasting. Seeking the pleasure of our Creator, it gives us a powerful why behind our efforts.
So it brings in this much broader context to our struggles and our efforts. Even the challenges of delaying gratification and building discipline can feel more meaningful when seen through that spiritual lens.
Absolutely. It's about connecting our everyday actions, even the seemingly small or difficult ones, to a much higher purpose. And that leads us to the next Islamic solution, dua and tawakkul.
Okay, so dua is, of course, our personal supplication to Allah, that direct connection. And tawakkul is often translated as trust in Allah. So how do these principles help us with productivity and overcoming inactivity?
So making dua every day, specifically asking Allah to help us be more productive and consistent, is incredibly powerful. It's an acknowledgement that we need His guidance and support in everything we do. And then tawakkul takes it a step further. It's not about passively accepting whatever happens. It's about striving, putting in our best effort, and then trusting that Allah has a plan and that He knows what's best for us, even if we don't see the results right away. It's about taking responsibility for our actions, but letting go of the anxiety about the outcome. We do our part, and we trust in Allah's wisdom and His blessings.
So it takes the pressure off of needing to see immediate success, and it encourages us to persevere knowing that our effort itself is valuable in Allah's eyes. The next Islamic principle is pretty specific. Pray, fajr, and discipline will follow.
There's a lot of wisdom in that statement. Fajr is the prayer we perform before sunrise, right? So waking up for Fajr when you could just stay asleep takes a lot of self-control and discipline. By consistently overcoming that initial resistance and making this act of worship a priority, we're essentially training ourselves in discipline from the very start of the day.
It's like winning the first battle of the day, as one of the scholars put it.
Exactly. And that victory can set the tone for the rest of the day, making it easier to tackle other tasks and resist procrastination. And then there's the Islamic perspective on laziness, which is known as qasis. The Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, used to make a specific dua seeking refuge in Allah from laziness and helplessness.
So it's not just a personal failing or lack of motivation. It's seen as a spiritual weakness that we need to actively seek refuge from and work to overcome.
Exactly. It recognizes that being productive and overcoming that inertia takes both our own willpower and divine assistance. And finally, the Islamic perspective emphasizes the baraka of small, consistent actions.
Baraka is such a beautiful concept. It's often described as a blessing and increase, a divine favor in something. So even small, consistent actions can have a huge, lasting, positive impact over time when they're imbued with this baraka.
The Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, said, "The most beloved actions to Allah are those that are consistent, even if small." And that perfectly aligns with the psychological concept of micro-habits. It's not about grand gestures that you do once in a while. It's about those steady, consistent efforts that are pleasing to Allah and that bring blessings into our lives.
It all comes back to that idea of being the farmer, not the gambler. Consistent effort, even when it feels slow and incremental, leads to the best results. And here's where it gets really interesting when we start to connect these two perspectives, the modern psychology and the Islamic wisdom.
It's amazing how often these two approaches converge on similar principles. Like, for instance, the psychological emphasis on breaking tasks down into small, manageable steps, like the 2-minute rule and micro-habits. That aligns perfectly with the Islamic concept of baraka, inconsistent actions, even small ones.
I see that.
They both recognize that slow, steady progress is powerful.
And the psychological idea of setting delayed rewards, training your brain to think long term, that resonates with the Islamic understanding of the afterlife and the idea of eternal success. It's about looking beyond immediate satisfaction to a much greater reward.
Yeah, it shifts your perspective.
Yeah.
And you could even argue that the Islamic emphasis on understanding our ultimate purpose in life provides a really strong foundation for developing process-based thinking in the psychological sense.
How so?
Well, when we connect our daily actions to a higher, more meaningful goal, the process itself becomes more significant, more enjoyable, and ultimately easier to stick with.
It's almost as if modern psychology is rediscovering principles that have been present in Islamic wisdom for centuries. The ideas of discipline, delayed gratification, the power of small, consistent actions, these are central themes in both.
I think you're right. It suggests a really deep connection. The wisdom has always been there, maybe expressed in different ways, but the underlying principles for overcoming laziness, becoming more productive, and living a life of purpose, they're remarkably similar.
So for our listeners who are struggling with feeling stuck and unproductive, what's the key takeaway from all of this?
I think the main message is to adopt the mindset of the farmer, not the gambler. Step away from chasing those quick hits of instant gratification and start investing in the long-term growth that comes from consistent, patient effort. And remember, even small efforts can make a big difference over time.
And that's why taking that first step is so important. If you're feeling stuck, do something small today, not tomorrow, not next week. Read a page of a book, do 5 minutes of exercise, anything. Just make the commitment to do it every day. Plant that seed.
And this brings us to a final thought. How can you bring a clearer sense of purpose into your life, whether it's through a spiritual understanding or just your personal values? And how can that change your relationship with productivity and your willingness to face discomfort? What is that seed that you can plant today through a small, consistent action that has the potential to grow into something truly meaningful and fulfilling for you in the long run?